She boarded the plane like any other passenger, calm, composed, with a first-class ticket in hand and years of quiet victories behind her. But what happened next would ignite a firestorm across the internet and force one of the largest airlines in the country to face a truth it had long avoided. Why did a flight attendant give Dr. Naomi Ellsworth's seat to a man who just happened to know the CEO? Why did the crew close ranks instead of correcting their mistake? And how could one woman, without shouting or losing her composure, turn a single act of injustice into a moment that shook the entire aviation industry? This isn't just a story about a stolen seat. It's about power, dignity, and the calm strength that can bring corporations to their knees. It's about how one moment, caught on camera, can expose years of silent discrimination. So the question is, what would you do if it happened to you? Before we dive into this powerful true-to-life story, make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the moments that matter most. Now, let's begin. Excuse me, but people like you don't belong in first class. This is for paying customers only. The words landed like a slap. Dr. Naomi Ellsworth froze in the narrow aisle of Flight 2762, the sound of the engines humming faintly outside the cabin window, the faint scent of brewed coffee mixed with the sterile air. But all Naomi could register was the tall figure in front of her, blocking the aisle completely. The flight attendant's name tag read Kara Whitmore. Her smile was polite in the way a blade is sharp, technically correct, but meant to cut. The bun in her blonde hair was so precise it looked sculpted, and her uniform was perfectly pressed. Yet her tone left no doubt about what she meant. Naomi glanced at the seat number on her boarding pass. Seat 2B. Paid in full. Confirmed upgrade. Weeks ago, her phone screen, still glowing with the Airline app, displayed the same thing, and yet, there in 2B, sat a white man in a tailored Navy suit, scrolling casually through his phone as if the seat had been his all along. "Ma'am," Kara said again, her voice pitched so nearby passengers could hear. "I'll need you to move to your assigned seat in economy. We have other guests boarding." Naomi's fingers tightened around the handle of her black leather briefcase. She had carried this case into federal courtrooms, congressional hearings, and negotiation rooms worth billions in contracts. 23 years as a civil rights attorney had taught her to recognize moments that could change more than just her day. This felt like one of them. The man in 2B glanced up from his phone. He had short, perfectly styled brown hair and the kind of expression Naomi had seen countless times before, mildly amused, faintly dismissive, and deeply certain that the world would bend to him. Martin Caldwell. Kara introduced without being asked, gesturing to him as though presenting a guest of honor. "Mr. Caldwell has already checked in for this seat." Martin gave a half-smile, leaning back in the wide leather seat. "Just take your real seat back there," he said, waving vaguely toward the curtain that separated first class from the rest of the plane. "Some of us actually paid for first class." Naomi's chest rose slowly. She had learned long ago not to give people like Martin the reaction they were fishing for. She simply held up her boarding pass, her phone, and her calm. "I believe there's been a mistake," she said evenly. Kara didn't glance at the screen. "These upgrade mix-ups happen all the time. Maybe someone used your miles without permission. It's common." She laughed lightly, and the sound was as sharp as broken glass. A few rows back, A young woman with long dark hair lowered her phone from eye level and whispered to herself, "Oh no, not today." Her name was Isabella Ramos, though friends called her Izzy. She was a digital media strategist who had an instinct for stories that mattered, and this one was buzzing in her gut. She unlocked her phone and tapped into her live stream app. "This is happening right now," Izzy whispered to her audience. "Flight 2762 boarding for Denver. You need to see this." Naomi caught the movement out of the corner of her eye. She didn't mind the camera. Documentation was power. Behind her, passengers shifted in the narrow aisle, adjusting bags, looking anywhere but directly at her. A few made eye contact, quick flashes of sympathy, but no one stepped forward. Kara folded her arms, adopting the patient but firm posture of someone convinced they were in control. "Ma'am, I really need you to move. You're holding up our departure." Naomi didn't move. "I'm simply asking for the seat I purchased." Martin exhaled loudly, clearly annoyed that the conversation was continuing. "Seriously, you're going to hold us all up over this. It's just a seat. Go sit in economy." Izzy's live stream viewer count ticked upward, 17, 26, 42. The comments began to roll in. "This is disgusting. Where is her boarding pass? Why is the attendant siding with the guy?" Naomi's mind flickered back to her father. A postal worker who had once been denied service at a cafe for no reason except the color of his skin. He had taught her to measure her words, to pick her moments carefully, to make her stands count. She took a slow breath. "I'd like to speak to a supervisor," she said. Kara tilted her head, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I'm trained to handle these situations. A supervisor won't change your seat assignment." A man in the second row of economy leaned forward. "I saw her board with first-class passengers," he said. Her ticket looked legitimate. "Sir, I appreciate your concern," Kara replied without turning. "But some people think rules don't apply to them." Naomi felt the burn of the words but didn't let it show. The truth was, she'd heard worse in boardrooms, in negotiations, even in casual conversations with people who thought they were being charming. What mattered was not the sting, but the record. "Please have your supervisor meet me here," she said again. Kara sighed, pressed a button on the intercom at the bulkhead, and spoke softly into it. Moments later, Daniel Kessler, the shift supervisor, stepped through the cabin door. He was in his early 40s, his tie slightly loosened, his expression already wary. "What's going on?" he asked. "This passenger," Kara said, gesturing toward Naomi, "is claiming a seat that was already assigned to Mr. Caldwell." Daniel glanced at Naomi's boarding pass, then at his tablet. "Our system shows Mr. Caldwell checked in for 2B this morning." Naomi held up her phone so he could see the glowing screen. "Paid upgrade, confirmed seat, same as the boarding pass in your hand." Daniel's brow furrowed. "These system conflicts are rare, but when they happen, we honor the earliest check-in." Izzy's live stream jumped to 126 viewers. The comments were coming faster now. "They're lying to her. She's showing proof. Why aren't they looking someone called corporate?" Naomi didn't flinch. "So you're saying I should accept losing the seat I paid for because someone else checked in earlier, even if it was an error?" Daniel avoided her eyes. "It's standard procedure." Naomi thought of all the times she had sat across from corporate counsel who used phrases like standard procedure to justify almost anything. And she thought of the conference she was flying to, the reason she had booked first class, knowing she'd need to be sharp and rested when she arrived. She stepped slightly to the side, letting the briefcase shift in her grip. Inside were folders marked confidential, sealed with court stamps, and a letter on official government stationery. She didn't take them out yet. Not yet. I see, she said softly. Izzy's phone caught the subtle change in her voice. Her viewers felt it too. Something was shifting. Naomi's pulse was steady. Her moment hadn't come yet, but it would. Naomi stayed exactly where she was, the black leather of her briefcase pressed lightly against her hip. She knew her stillness was making Kara uneasy. People who expect submission often grow impatient when it doesn't arrive. "Kara," Daniel said in a quieter voice, "let's just double-check the records." "It's fine," Kara replied. "This is a simple case of a passenger misunderstanding her ticket." Naomi's gaze didn't waver. "I'm not misunderstanding anything. You have my boarding pass in your hand. You can see the confirmation on my phone." Martin shifted in his seat, his expression sliding from mild amusement to visible annoyance. "This is ridiculous. You're making a scene over nothing. If you can afford first class, I'm sure you can buy it again another time." The condescension in his voice was a familiar tone Naomi had heard in conference rooms when her proposals were ignored, only to be praised when repeated by someone else a moment later. She felt the spark of anger, but she held it in place, letting it burn slowly, controlled. A few passengers in nearby rows were watching closely now. A man in 3C leaned forward, trying to listen without being obvious. A woman in 4A clutched her tote bag a little tighter, glancing between Naomi and the crew. Izzy's phone kept rolling, her voice low but clear for her viewers. "She's showing them proof. They're not even looking at it. This doesn't feel like a mix-up. This feels like something else." On Naomi's screen, the airline app still showed her seat 2B, the confirmation number, the paid upgrade charge. There was nothing ambiguous. "Ma'am," Kara said, the sweetness in her voice turning brittle, "if you don't take your assigned seat in economy, you'll be delaying our departure. I'll have to call security." Naomi met her eyes evenly. "You can call whomever you need. I'm not moving from the seat I paid for." She paused deliberately, or rather, the seat I am owed. Daniel glanced at Martin, and Naomi caught at that flicker of deference, of knowing who held power. It wasn't her boarding pass Daniel respected in that moment. It was Martin's presence, his suit, his assumed importance. Martin chuckled under his breath. Some people just like to play the victim. Izzy's livestream viewer count jumped past 200. Comments poured in. "She's calm. They're the ones escalating. Get names. We want names. Why's that guy smirking like he owns the place?" Daniel straightened. "We need to move forward with Borden. Ms. Ellsworth, I'm going to have to insist you take your seat in economy for now. We can address the refund later." There it was, the corporate compromise. Give up what you're owed now. Fight for scraps later. Naomi's mind flashed to a deposition she'd taken years ago, when a company's representative had said almost the exact same thing to a group of workers they had shorted on pay. "We'll fix it later," but later rarely came without a fight. "I'm not comfortable with that arrangement," she said. Daniel's jaw tightened. Kara folded her arms. The aisle felt narrower, the air thicker. Passengers behind Naomi were waiting, a mix of curiosity and impatience in their eyes. "I can step aside into the galley while you verify the seating records with your gate team," Naomi offered. Her tone was steady, as if they were all reasonable people trying to solve a logistical puzzle. Kara gave a tight smile. I've already told you. We don't need to do that. This happens all the time. I'm trained to handle it." Izzy whispered into her phone. She keeps saying, "I'm trained to handle it." She's not handling anything. She's just telling this woman to move. The tension had begun to radiate down the cabin. More phones appeared, tilted toward the scene. Naomi could hear the faint click of a record button somewhere behind her. Then Martin spoke again, this time with a louder, more performative tone. "Look, lady, you're embarrassing yourself. Take the seat they're giving you before you get kicked off this flight." Naomi turned her head toward him slowly. "Embarrassment isn't mine to carry here." For a brief moment, Martin looked startled. Daniel stepped in again. "Ms. Ellsworth, if you can just, I've explained my position." Naomi interrupted softly, her voice low but unyielding. Izzy's viewers began tagging the airline's official account in the comments. Names, flight number, timestamp. The digital paper trail was growing by the minute. A woman in 5D leaned out into the aisle. "I've flown with this airline for 15 years, she said, her voice clear. "I've seen this before. It's wrong." Kara turned toward her with the same tight smile. "Ma'am, we appreciate your concern. We'll handle this." The words carried that same unspoken message, "Stay out of it." Naomi could feel the balance beginning to shift. This wasn't just between her, Kara, and Martin anymore. The other passengers were becoming part of the equation, whether they wanted to or not. In her chest, she felt the familiar coil of strategic patience, the one she used in court when a witness thought they were winning, just before she revealed the document that dismantled their testimony. She wasn't ready to pull her own evidence yet, but she would. Daniel sighed. "I'm going to get the gate supervisor to confirm. Please wait here." He stepped back toward the forward galley, speaking into his radio. Kara stayed put, still blocking the aisle. Her eyes were cool, her chin slightly lifted. Martin went back to scrolling his phone, though Naomi could see the way his jaw tightened when another passenger's camera angled toward him. Izzy's viewer count had passed 400. The comments were sharper now. "They're stalling because they know they're wrong. Don't move. Naomi, hold your ground." Why is the supervisor deferring to the guy in the suit? Naomi thought briefly about the legal conference she was heading to in Denver, about the keynote she was supposed to give on systemic discrimination and corporate policy, and about how she might now have a far more personal example to share. Her phone buzzed in her hand, a message from her assistant, reminding her of the afternoon's agenda. She let the screen go dark again. Right now, this was the only agenda that mattered. The gate supervisor's voice came over Daniel's radio, but Naomi couldn't make out the words. Daniel returned, his expression unreadable. "We're still showing Mr. Caldwell in that seat," he said finally. "Earliest check-in takes precedence. I'm sorry." Naomi inhaled once, exhaled slowly, and said nothing. Not yet. She could feel Izzy's camera on her, the passenger's eyes waiting for her reaction. Inside, her thoughts were calm but sharp, like a blade resting in its sheath. She had been underestimated before. It had never ended well for the person doing the underestimating. Her moment was coming. Naomi remained where she was, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of her briefcase. The energy in the cabin had shifted. Passengers were no longer pretending not to notice. They were watching openly now, some whispering, others holding their phones high enough to capture the scene. Izzy's live stream ticked past 600 viewers. The comment feed scrolled so quickly that even she couldn't keep up with it. Messages flew in from usernames she didn't recognize, people likely watching because someone had already shared the link on another platform. It was spreading. Kara shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the practiced smile still frozen in place. She clearly wanted Naomi to move, to fold quietly so boarding could continue. But Naomi's stillness was its own form of resistance. From 3 rows back, a man in a red baseball cap muttered, "She's not doing anything wrong." A few people nodded. Others stayed silent, unsure if speaking up would make them targets. Martin Caldwell sighed loudly again, as though the entire flight were being inconvenienced for his personal suffering. "Honestly, this is absurd. We're going to be late because someone doesn't know how to follow the rules." Naomi turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. "Following the rules is exactly what I'm doing. Sitting in the seat I purchased is following the rules." He smirked. "You just can't accept that sometimes you don't get what you want." Her voice didn't rise. "And you can't accept that sometimes you're in the wrong seat." Izzy nearly grinned behind her phone. Her viewers reacted instantly. "She's sharp. Keep going." This guy's face when she said that somebody tagged the airline on Twitter. Daniel reappeared from the galley, his jaw set. "Ms. Ellsworth, we need to keep the boarding process moving. If you don't take the seat in economy, you'll be removed from the flight." There it was, the threat. Naomi let the words settle. In another life, before decades of law and courtrooms, maybe she would have just accepted the lesser seat and dealt with the refund later. But not now. Not after all the cases she'd handled where someone's quiet compliance had been turned into justification for more of the same treatment. "I'm not refusing to board," she said calmly. "I'm refusing to accept a lesser service than the one I paid for." Kara stepped closer, close enough that Naomi could see the faint outline of makeup along her jaw. "Ma'am, we can't stand here debating this. The flight is going to be delayed." Behind them, a young man with a shaved head spoke up. "Why don't you just put her in her seat and figure it out later? She clearly has the proof." Kara shot him a look that was all polished professionalism on the surface, annoyance beneath. "Sir, we have procedures." The young man muttered something under his breath about procedures that made the woman next to him chuckle. Izzy adjusted her phone to include both Naomi and Martin in the frame. "For everyone watching," she murmured, "the woman in the black suit is Dr. Naomi Ellsworth. She's showing a confirmed boarding pass for seat 2B. The man in the blue suit has no paper ticket visible, only a phone screen. The flight attendant is insisting she move." More viewers poured in, over 900 now. Comments mentioned sharing the stream to airline complaint boards, to journalists, to legal aid accounts. The story was catching. Daniel's radio crackled with static before a voice came through. He turned slightly away to answer. Naomi caught pieces of the exchange boarding delay, passenger dispute, possible removal. The word removal sent a ripple through the surrounding seats. Passengers shifted, eyes widening, phones tilting higher. Naomi watched the reactions carefully. She could feel a current of support building. Quiet, but real. It wasn't just her anymore. People were starting to take sides, and the tide was leaning her way. Daniel lowered his radio. "Security will be here in a moment," he said. "Let's make this easy for everyone." Naomi tilted her head, easy for whom he didn't answer. Kara gestured toward the curtain leading to economy. "Your seat is waiting, ma'am." Naomi's reply was soft. "My seat is here." For a moment, the air seemed to still. The sound of boarding announcements from the gate drifted faintly into the cabin. Then a voice from row 5 broke the tension. An older woman with silver hair and an upright posture stood, holding the seat back for balance. "I've been flying for 40 years," she said clearly. "I've seen this kind of thing before, and it's wrong." Several passengers murmured in agreement. The woman's statement seemed to give permission for others to speak. A man in row 6 leaned out. "If she's got the ticket, why is this even a debate?" Izzy swung her phone toward them briefly, capturing the growing chorus. Her viewer count climbed over 1,000. Comments flew faster than she could read. Daniel's face tightened. "Everyone, please remain seated. We'll handle this." Naomi watched him carefully. She'd dealt with enough negotiations to know when someone was feeling the heat. His tone was a shade too firm, his stance a touch too rigid. He was losing ground. Martin tried to reassert control, leaning back in his seat with a theatrical sigh. Some people just like to make everything about them. Naomi didn't look at him. Instead, she addressed Daniel and Kara. "You're about to make a choice in front of dozens of witnesses and, judging by the cameras, hundreds more watching online. You might want to be sure it's the choice you want, representing your airline." That landed. Naomi saw it in the flicker of Daniel's eyes and the way Kara's smile faltered for the first time. A moment later, the cabin door opened and a uniformed woman stepped in. She wore the TSA badge on her shoulder and moved with practiced authority. "Officer Monique Harris," she introduced herself. "What's the situation?" Daniel gestured toward Naomi. Passenger refusing to take her assigned seat in economy. Naomi met Monique's gaze. Passenger holding a confirmed boarding pass for 2B. The man in the seat checked in later than I did. "The crew is insisting I move." Monique glanced between Naomi's phone screen and Martin's casual sprawl in the seat. "Is there a reason we can't just confirm with the gate records?" Kara answered quickly. "We've already confirmed. The seat belongs to Mr. Caldwell." Izzy's voice came softly from behind her phone. "They're not saying how they confirmed." Monique looked at Daniel. "If she has proof, procedure says earliest check-in." Daniel cut in. Naomi took a slow breath, feeling the coiled patience in her chest tighten. She was almost ready to let it loose. Not yet, but soon. Izzy's live stream climbed past 500 viewers. Comments begged Naomi not to give in, to keep holding her ground. The phones pointed at her multiplied. The cabin now filled with the soft glow of screens. Naomi met Monique's eyes again. "Are you familiar with the airline's passenger rights policy regarding confirmed seat assignments?" Monique hesitated. That question wasn't what she expected. "I'm aware of it," she said cautiously. "Good," Naomi replied. "Then you know this isn't just about a seat. It's about whether your airline honors its own commitments." The silence that followed was thick. Izzy's viewers could feel it even through their screens. Naomi didn't move. She wasn't going to. Monique didn't move right away. She studied Naomi for a moment, then glanced at the boarding pass still in Daniel's hand. Her eyes shifted to the phone in Naomi's palm, the glowing confirmation screen impossible to ignore. Passengers leaned forward to watch. The quiet in the cabin was different now. Less avoidance, more anticipation. Everyone seemed to know something was about to change. Daniel cleared his throat. "Officer Harris, we have a policy to follow here. The system says Mr. Caldwell systems can be wrong." Monique interrupted. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut cleanly through the tension. Kara's smile tightened, as if she were trying to hold her place in the conversation. "We've already resolved this with the gate." Naomi's voice was soft but unwavering. "You haven't resolved anything. You've decided. That's different." Izzy's phone caught the moment perfectly, the way Naomi didn't raise her voice, didn't flinch, but made her point with surgical precision. Her viewer count ticked higher, 900. Martin leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. "Why is this taking so long? We have a schedule." From behind him, a woman in a business suit said clearly, "We all have schedules. She's not wrong for asking for the seat she paid for." Daniel glanced toward the voice but didn't respond. Naomi shifted her briefcase slightly, the subtle movement enough to draw Monique's eyes. The polished leather caught the overhead light. Naomi's hand rested on the clasp. "Not opening it yet. Let's make this simple." Naomi said, "Call the gate manager here. We'll resolve it in 5 minutes." Kara shook her head. "We don't need to escalate to you already have." Naomi interrupted, her tone still calm. "The moment you chose to ignore documented proof, you escalated." Izzy's viewers flooded the comments. "She's in control. Look at that flight attendant's face. They're scared to call the gate manager because they know they're wrong." Martin muttered something under his breath, but Naomi didn't acknowledge it. She'd learned long ago that certain provocations weren't worth the oxygen it took to respond. Daniel's radio crackled. He turned slightly, listening, then spoke quietly into it. When he faced them again, his jaw was tighter. "The gate manager will be here shortly." Monique stepped back, giving Naomi room but keeping her position between her and the crew. The shift was subtle but noticeable. Naomi let her breath out slowly. This wasn't the win, not yet, but it was the first crack in the wall. Izzy whispered for her stream, "You can feel it changing. She's not moving, and now security isn't either." From the front of the cabin, the curtain opened and a tall man in a crisp navy blazer stepped in. His badge read Ethan Price, but not his crew. The small press credential clipped beneath it read the National Ledger. "I was boarding for my seat in 3A when I noticed the situation," Ethan said politely. "Mind if I ask a few questions while you wait for the gate manager?" Daniel's frown deepened. "This is an internal matter." Naomi turned her head toward Ethan. "I don't mind." He smiled faintly and leaned just enough to address her without blocking the aisle. "Is it correct that you have a confirmed first-class ticket for this seat?" "Yes," Naomi replied, "and the man currently in the seat checked in after you did. That's what I understand from the timeline." Ethan scribbled in a small notebook. His eyes were sharp, scanning the scene quickly before focusing back on Naomi. "And you've shown proof to the crew repeatedly," Naomi said. Izzy caught every word on her live stream. Her viewer count passed 2,300. Comments exploded again. "Journalist on board. This is getting serious. They can't hide now. Tag news outlets." Martin shifted uncomfortably, finally looking at Ethan. "This is just a seating mix-up. She's making it into a Ethan cut him off gently." "And you are Martin Caldwell," he said with a touch of pride. Ethan's eyebrow lifted. "Any relation Jonathan Caldwell?" Martin's lips curved slightly. "He's my brother." The air in the cabin seemed to thicken. Naomi didn't react outwardly, but inside she felt the click of puzzle pieces sliding into place. Ethan glanced at Naomi, then back at Martin. "That's useful context." Daniel's radio crackled again. He listened, nodded once, and said, Gate manager is on the way." Naomi's fingers brushed the clasp of her briefcase. She thought of the documents inside merger agreements, shareholder proxies, and one very particular letter on federal stationery. Not yet, she told herself. Timing was everything. Kara glanced toward the boarding door, then back at Naomi. "You could make this so much easier on everyone by just, 'I'm not here to make it easy,'" Naomi said softly. "I'm here to make it right." A murmur rippled through the cabin. The woman in the business suit in row 4 gave a small nod. The older lady in row 5 folded her hands over her bag and smiled faintly, as though she'd heard words like that in her own battles long ago. Izzy's voice was almost reverent into her phone. That line, right there, "I'm here to make it right." The curtain at the boarding door moved again, and a man stepped through. His badge read Paul Grant, Gate Manager. He had the slightly rumpled look of someone who'd been pulled away from paperwork and didn't appreciate it. "What's going on?" Paul asked. Daniel gestured. "Passengers claiming a seat already assigned to Mr. Caldwell." Paul's eyes flicked between Naomi, Martin, and the crew. "Boarding pass," he said simply. Naomi handed over the paper and held out her phone. Paul studied both, scrolling on his own tablet. "This shows a confirmed paid upgrade to 2B. Paul said slowly. Daniel spoke quickly. "But earliest check-in takes precedence." Paul frowned. "Earliest confirmed reservation takes precedence. That's the written policy." Kara's smile faltered completely. Izzy's viewers blew up the comments section. "There it is. They're caught. Gate manager just said she's right. Play the policy card now." Paul looked at Daniel. "We need to resolve this in line with policy. That means Ms. Ellsworth gets her seat." Martin's voice was sharp. "You can't just throw me out." My brother Paul's head turned slowly toward him. "Your brother isn't here, and policy doesn't say anything about family exceptions." The shift was complete now. Naomi could feel it. Still, she kept her voice level. "I appreciate you checking." Paul nodded once. "I'll handle the seating chart. Let's keep boarding moving." Daniel looked like he'd swallowed something sour. Kara didn't meet Naomi's eyes. Monique stepped slightly closer to Naomi, her voice pitched low enough for only her to hear. "You handled that well." Naomi's reply was just as quiet. "It's not over." Izzy's camera caught her face in that moment, calm, controlled, and utterly certain. Her viewer count climbed again. The internet could smell that something bigger was coming. Paul Grant didn't get the chance to finish adjusting the seating chart. A voice from the doorway cut through the low hum of the cabin. "Hold on. Before we finalize anything, I need a word." A man in a dark gray suit stepped inside. His posture was sharp, his expression carefully neutral. Naomi recognized the type instantly middle management, trained to sound calm while making decisions that would never touch them personally. His badge read Daniel Kessler. But he wasn't just here as the shift supervisor anymore. The tone in his voice carried the weight of someone who believed they were the closer. "Mr. Grant," Daniel said. "I'll take it from here." Paul raised his eyebrows but didn't argue. "The policy's clear," he said, and handed the tablet back before retreating toward the boarding door. Daniel turned to Naomi. "Ms. Ellsworth, I understand your position, but this is delaying our departure. We have to make a call." Naomi kept her gaze steady. "And you've been making calls since I stepped onto this plane. Every one of them has been wrong." A ripple of whispers moved through the first-class cabin. Izzy's live stream picked up every word, her viewers pushing past 3,000. Comments flashed across the screen. She's not backing down. This guy just walked in like he's the hero. Watch her handle him. Policy was already confirmed. Why is he even here? Daniel glanced at the cameras, his discomfort barely concealed. Ma'am, no one's questioning your right to a seat. But, yes, they are. Naomi cut in. That's exactly what's happening. You've questioned it for the last 10 minutes while the man sitting there hasn't shown a single piece of proof beyond a phone screen. Martin shifted in his seat, his lips pressing together. His eyes darted toward Daniel, an unspoken signal. Daniel cleared his throat. Mr. Caldwell checked in earlier this morning. Earlier is irrelevant, Naomi said. Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. The written policy states earliest confirmed reservation takes precedence. That's my reservation. Monique, the TSA officer, spoke for the first time since Paul left. She's right. That's the policy. Kara shot Monique a quick look, but said nothing. Daniel's jaw flexed. We can't have this argument here. I'm asking you to step off the aircraft so we can talk privately. No, Naomi said, because when situations like this are handled privately, accountability disappears. The older woman in row 5 spoke again, her voice cutting through the charged air. She should stay right where she is. We're all witnesses now. Several passengers nodded. Izzy's camera panned briefly across the cabin to catch the faces, some serious, some angry, but all engaged. Naomi could feel the tide solidifying. This wasn't just a personal standoff anymore. It had become a shared moment. Daniel took a step closer. If you refuse to comply, I'll have no choice but to remove you from the flight. Naomi didn't blink. Then you'll remove a paying customer with documented proof of her seat assignment in front of hundreds of digital witnesses and at least one national journalist. Are you sure that's the choice you want to make? Ethan Price, seated near the front, looked up from his notebook. I can confirm I'm recording as well. If she's removed under these circumstances, it will be reported as part of my story. Daniel's eyes flickered to Ethan. For the first time, his certainty wavered. Monique crossed her arms. A subtle signal she wasn't eager to participate in a removal. Izzy's viewers were relentless now. He's boxed in. She's untouchable with this many witnesses. Watch them backtrack. The air in the cabin felt thicker, the stakes heavier. Naomi's fingers brushed the clasp of her briefcase again. She thought about the folder inside with the gold seal, the one she'd kept for exactly this kind of moment. She heard her father's voice in her mind. Don't waste your ammunition early. Wait until the other side thinks they've won. Daniel shifted his stance. Look, we don't need to involve anyone else. You already have, Naomi replied, nodding toward the rows of passengers with their cameras raised. Kara moved toward the boarding door, muttering something about calling corporate. Naomi caught the change in the passengers' posture. They were leaning in, eyes fixed on her, waiting for her next move. She could feel the collective hunger for resolution. Daniel, Naomi said evenly, this is your opportunity to correct a mistake before it turns into something much bigger. The choice is yours. For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of the air system and the faint shuffle of passengers adjusting in their seats were the only sounds. Daniel looked at Martin, then at Kara, then finally back at Naomi. You're not going to give up that seat. Are you? No, Naomi said. And you're not going to win this by pushing me into the shadows. Izzy's voice came softly through her phone's mic. "This is it. She's about to end this part of the fight." Daniel exhaled, clearly weighing his options. "I'll need to speak with the captain." Naomi inclined her head slightly. "Please do." He turned toward the cockpit, his steps brisk. The passengers watched him go, a murmur starting to build again. Izzy's viewer count ticked past 4,000. Comments speculated about what would happen next, some predicting Naomi's removal, others confident she'd win. Naomi stood steady, her breath calm, her focus sharpened to a point. She knew the next few minutes would decide everything. When Daniel disappeared into the cockpit, Kara lingered at the front of the cabin, her posture stiff. She glanced at Martin, then at Naomi, then back again. Martin smirked, though it looked more like a nervous twitch now. "Hope you like the middle seat in economy." Naomi met his gaze without expression. "Hope you like answering questions about why you're sitting in my seat?" The smirk faltered. The older woman in row 5 leaned toward Naomi. "I don't know you, but I'm glad you're standing your ground." Naomi offered the faintest smile. "Some things are worth standing for." Kara busied herself with rearranging a beverage cart that didn't need rearranging. Izzy whispered to her audience again. "She's not moving. Daniel's in the cockpit. This is going to blow up in the next part." Naomi kept her eyes on the forward cabin. She could almost feel the moment building, like the pause before a verdict is read. It was coming, and she was ready. The cockpit door opened and Daniel stepped out, his expression tighter than before. Behind him, the captain's face appeared briefly in the doorway, scanning the cabin as though measuring the atmosphere before retreating back inside. Daniel cleared his throat. "Ms. Ellsworth, the captain has been briefed. He's concerned about departure delays. We're going to need to resolve this right now." Naomi could feel the eyes of every passenger on her, the glow from several phone screens illuminating their faces. Izzy's live stream had climbed past 5,000 viewers. In the scrolling feed, comments alternated between outrage and encouragement. She eased her briefcase in front of her and unlatched the clasp. The soft click of the metal was barely audible, but in the charged silence of the cabin, it sounded louder. "Let's resolve it." Then, she said. Her hand slipped inside, past the pens and small legal pads, until her fingers closed on a navy folder embossed with silver lettering. When she withdrew it, the cabin lights caught the foil seal of a major law firm. She opened the folder deliberately, revealing the first page an executive summary of a pending merger between the airline they were sitting on and a West Coast competitor. "This," Naomi said, turning slightly so both Daniel and Monique could see, "is my firm's representation agreement with several institutional investors holding 12% of your company's outstanding shares." Daniel blinked, unsure how to respond. "My role," Naomi continued, "is to advise those investors on whether to approve this merger. A merger, I might add, that requires 67% approval and is currently hovering around 64. From somewhere in the cabin, a passenger let out a low whistle. Izzy's camera caught every detail of Daniel's changing expression. Martin shifted in his seat, leaning forward. "What are you trying to say?" Naomi's eyes moved to him. "I'm saying, Mr. Caldwell, that your family's airline is one decision away from moving forward with this merger or watching it collapse." Martin scoffed. "You're bluffing." Ethan Price spoke up from his seat, his tone casual but edged. I can verify her credentials. She's telling the truth." The tension in the cabin deepened. Monique glanced at Daniel, clearly reassessing her position. Naomi reached back into the briefcase and pulled out a second document. This one bore the seal of the Federal Aviation Administration. "And, in addition to my private clients," she said, "I'm also serving as counsel to the FAA's Civil Rights Office on an active review of discriminatory practices in commercial aviation." The murmurs from passengers grew louder. Phones tilted higher to catch the exchange. Izzy's live stream chat exploded. "FAA. She's playing chess while they're playing checkers. They picked the wrong passenger." Daniel's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Ms. Ellsworth." "I don't see how it's very simple," Naomi said, cutting him off. "Incidents like this one documented, broadcast live, witnessed by multiple passengers are exactly the type of case study that will shape FAA policy. Which means your handling of this isn't just about a seat. It's about your company's exposure to federal scrutiny and shareholder backlash." Martin shifted again, but this time his movements were less confident. He stared at the document as if it might somehow disappear if he didn't acknowledge it. Izzy's voice was low but steady as she narrated for her viewers. "She's laying it out for them, and you can see they're realizing they have no way out without giving her what's hers." Naomi closed the folder but kept it in view. "I have been patient. I've given you every chance to resolve this quietly. But you've chosen to ignore your own policy and side with an individual who, unless I'm mistaken, is directly related to your CEO." Daniel's silence was confirmation enough. Ethan tapped his pen against his notebook. That would be a major conflict of interest if confirmed. Definitely a story. Martin finally spoke, his voice lower now. "I didn't know it was your seat." Naomi turned her head toward him slowly. "Ignorance doesn't erase entitlement, and it doesn't repair the damage done when your privilege is protected over another customer's rights." Several passengers murmured in agreement. The older woman in row 5 said, "That's the truth." Monique took a small step closer to Naomi. "Given what you've shown me, I can't justify forcing you to move." Daniel exhaled heavily. "I'll have to contact corporate." Naomi's tone stayed calm. "You do that, and while you're on the phone, consider that in the next 24 hours. My firm will be finalizing its recommendation on this merger. The choice you make in the next 5 minutes will determine what's in that recommendation." Izzy's viewers were sending rapid-fire comments. "This is insane." "She has them cornered." "The CEO's brother is in her seat, and they tried to kick her out." "Corporate is about to melt down." Daniel moved toward the boarding door, pulling his phone from his pocket. Kara stood stiffly beside Martin. Her earlier confidence eroded. Naomi stayed still, watching them. In her mind, the pieces were aligning exactly as she'd anticipated. It wasn't just about winning her seat back anymore. It was about forcing them to confront the larger cost of what they'd tried to do. The captain emerged briefly from the cockpit, his expression neutral. "Ms. Ellsworth, I understand there's a dispute, but we need to maintain the schedule." "I understand," Naomi replied, "and I'm prepared to take my seat, the one I purchased the moment your crew honors the confirmed reservation policy." The captain looked at Monique, then Daniel, then Kara. Without a word, he stepped back into the cockpit. Ethan's pen scratched quickly over paper. "That was telling," he murmured. Naomi kept her briefcase open, the folder still visible. Every second it sat there in plain view was another second the crew had to reckon with what it represented. Izzy's live stream count hit 6,200. Viewers from different time zones were tuning in, tagging media outlets, speculating about corporate response. Daniel reappeared, his phone still in his hand, his expression a shade more pale. Corporate is aware of the situation. They're reviewing. Naomi didn't break eye contact. They have 3 minutes. Daniel's voice carried an edge he hadn't intended, the tension in his jaw obvious as he held the phone. He was listening more than speaking now, eyes fixed on a point somewhere over Naomi's shoulder. Whatever he was hearing from corporate, it wasn't the kind of guidance that made him feel secure. Naomi kept her posture relaxed, though inside her mind was in motion, reading each flicker of expression from him, each tight inhale. She knew the signs of a conversation turning against someone. She'd seen it happen to opposing counsel enough times to recognize when the air shifted. From her seat, Izzy's voice was low but clear enough for her phone's microphone to catch. You can tell they're stalling. He's waiting for someone above him to make a call. He's afraid to make himself. A few passengers murmured to each other. The older woman in row 5 folded her hands in her lap, her gaze fixed on Naomi as though willing her strength into the moment. Martin sat stiffly now, his earlier smirk gone. His eyes darted between Naomi and Daniel. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath, though not so quietly that no one heard. All of this over one seat. Naomi turned to face him fully for the first time since she'd revealed the documents. Her voice was calm, but every word landed with precision. "It's not just one seat, Mr. Caldwell. It's the principle of whether an airline respects its paying customers equally. It's about whether your last name buys you what someone else has already paid for. That's what this is." Izzy's audience responded instantly. That's it. She nailed it. The entitlement on this guy. Keep holding the line. Daniel lowered the phone from his ear. He didn't look directly at Naomi when he spoke. Corporate would like to confirm a few details before making a decision. Naomi kept her voice even. And who are they confirming those details with? The same people who've been ignoring the documentation I've presented for the last 20 minutes. Monique shifted her stance. They should be confirming it with the gate manager. He already said her reservation takes precedence. Daniel's eyes flickered to Monique. They're looking at all the records that have already been proven to have discrepancies, Naomi said. Let's save everyone the trouble. She reached back into her briefcase and withdrew a smaller folder. This one was black, the lettering on the front in understated gold. She flipped it open to reveal a document stamped with the airline's own policy on seating disputes. Daniel read the title, and his shoulders stiffened. Naomi tapped a section with one neatly manicured finger. Earliest confirmed reservation supersedes earliest check-in. That is your airline's policy. This, she said, glancing at Martin, is not a matter of interpretation. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hiss of the air vents. Then Ethan spoke up from his seat near the aisle. If I were you, Mr. Kessler, I'd take a hard look at how many cameras are recording this interaction. You're not just dealing with one dissatisfied passenger here, you're dealing with an incident that's already gone public. Daniel glanced toward Izzy, her phone clearly capturing his profile. The chat feed on her screen was nearly unreadable now, scrolling too quickly as more people tuned in. Naomi didn't need to check to know the live stream was spreading. She could feel it in the way the passengers were sitting more upright, more focused, more present in the conflict. This was no longer background noise to their journey. This was the story of the flight. Izzy tilted her phone slightly toward Naomi. "We're at 7,200 viewers," she whispered. "Someone's streaming my feed to a news channel." Naomi nodded once but didn't take her eyes off Daniel. "You're out of time. Make the call." Daniel exhaled, clearly frustrated, and brought the phone back to his ear. He turned away as he spoke, but his voice was still audible to those closest. "Yes. She has documentation. Yes. Multiple witnesses. Yes. I understand." When he ended the call, he didn't speak right away. His eyes flicked to Martin, then to Kara, then reluctantly back to Naomi. "Corporate would like to de-escalate." Naomi waited, letting the silence press him to finish. "They're asking," Daniel said, "if you'd be willing to take another first-class seat instead of 2B. The passengers around them stirred. Izzy's eyebrows shot up. Naomi shook her head slowly. "No, this is not about being in first class. It's about being in the seat I purchased, the one you gave away without cause. Giving me another seat doesn't fix what you did, it erases it." The older woman in row 5 said, "Good for you," and several passengers murmured in agreement. Martin leaned forward. "This is absurd. Just take another seat and let's go." Naomi looked at him steadily. "If you want the plane to move, Mr. Caldwell, the quickest solution is for you to stand up." His mouth opened, then closed again, but no words came out. Ethan's pen moved rapidly across his notebook. Izzy shifted her phone to capture Martin's expression. Naomi's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen and saw a name that made the corner of her mouth tighten. Jonathan Caldwell. She let it ring, then silenced it. The act was deliberate, visible to anyone watching. Izzy whispered for her viewers. She just ignored a call from the CEO. "Oh, this is big." Naomi slid the phone into her briefcase. "Tell corporate," she said to Daniel, "that if this seat isn't returned to me in the next 2 minutes, the recommendation on their merger changes. Permanently." Daniel's gaze darted toward Martin. Martin's face had lost much of its earlier color. "You can't," he began, but Naomi stopped him with a raised hand. "I can," she said, "and I will." The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Even the faint clink of glassware from the galley had stopped. Daniel finally nodded once and spoke into his radio. "Confirming reassignment of seat 2B to passenger Ellsworth." The sound of the words was like a release. Several passengers exhaled audibly. Izzy's chat erupted. Ethan leaned back in his seat, his smile small but certain. But Naomi didn't move. Not yet. There was more to be done, and she wasn't finished with them. Naomi remained standing in the aisle, her briefcase resting against her leg. The seat was technically hers again, but she could feel in her bones that this was not the moment to sit down. The moment now belonged to leverage, to making sure the consequences reached far beyond this aircraft. Daniel cleared his throat as if to move things along. "We've reassigned the seat. Ms. Ellsworth, you can go ahead and take it now so we can get underway." Naomi didn't move. "No," she said calmly, her voice carrying without being loud. "We're not finished. You've addressed my personal inconvenience, but you have not addressed the misconduct that caused it. If I sit down now, the only lesson learned is that the right documentation and enough public pressure gets one passenger what they're owed. That's not enough for me," Martin muttered. "Here we go," under his breath. But the words didn't land with the same smugness they once had. His tone now carried the hollow defensiveness of someone who knew they were exposed. Naomi turned slightly so she could speak to both Daniel and Kara. "You want to resolve this? Then we make it right. That means 3 things." The cabin was quiet. Izzy adjusted her phone to frame Naomi fully in the shot. Her viewer count climbed past 8,000. "First," Naomi said, "Mr. Caldwell vacates this flight with a permanent ban from your airline for attempting to claim a seat he knew was not his, aided by crew members who acted without verifying the rightful assignment. This isn't about family connections. It's about accountability." Martin's eyes widened. "You can't ban me. You'd be surprised what corporate can do when the alternative is a shareholder revolt and federal investigation," Naomi said, cutting him off. Several passengers shifted in their seats, the older woman in row 5 nodding slowly as though in approval. "Second," Naomi continued, "Ms. Whitmore and Mr. Kessler are relieved of duty, effective immediately for ignoring company policy and enforcing a double standard in front of multiple witnesses. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm stating that this is the minimum action necessary to demonstrate that your airline takes discrimination seriously." Kara's face went pale. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. "Third," Naomi said, "this airline adopts a protocol for real-time discrimination reporting. Not a vague suggestion, not a training memo, but a mandatory process with immediate notification to corporate leadership and federal oversight when an incident occurs. That protocol will include a 24-hour resolution requirement, documented compensation, and permanent records accessible to the passenger involved. You will fund and implement this within 72 hours. Daniel's jaw dropped slightly. "That's reasonable," Naomi interrupted. "And I'm not done. This is the only way I will consider continuing to recommend to my clients that they support your upcoming merger. I will give you 60 seconds to confirm that these actions will be taken. Otherwise, I will instruct my firm to advise a vote against the merger, and when that happens, it will fail." Her watch face caught the light as she lifted her arm slightly. "Your time starts now," Izzy whispered for her live stream. "She's given them 60 seconds. This is unreal." Ethan flipped to a fresh page in his notebook, his pen moving fast. Monique stood slightly behind Naomi now, her arms crossed, her presence a silent reinforcement. Jonathan Caldwell's name appeared on Naomi's phone again. She pressed decline without hesitation, letting the moment land with visible intent. Daniel glanced toward the front of the plane, his eyes darting between the cockpit door and Kara. Kara looked like she was trying to calculate whether to defend herself or remain silent. Martin shifted in his seat again, the sound of the leather creaking under his weight. He opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly aware that anything he said now would only make him look worse. 20 seconds passed. The only sounds were the faint hum of the engines and the soft tapping of Ethan's pen. 30 seconds. Izzy's viewer count passed 9,500. Comments speculated on whether corporate would give in, whether the merger would collapse, whether Jonathan Caldwell himself would appear at the boarding door. 40 seconds. Daniel's radio crackled. He lifted it quickly to his mouth, murmured a few words, then listened. His jaw worked as he nodded to whatever was being said. 50 seconds. Naomi lowered her arm slightly, the watch still visible. Daniel took a breath and straightened his shoulders. Corporate agrees to your conditions, all of them. The tension in the cabin broke like a held breath finally released. Some passengers clapped softly, others murmured in disbelief. Izzy's feed erupted with reactions. Naomi gave a single nod. Then we can proceed. Martin's eyes narrowed. You really think you've won something here? Naomi met his gaze evenly. I didn't come here to win. I came here to make sure this never happens to the next person in my position. Kara's hands twisted slightly in front of her, but she said nothing. Daniel turned toward the boarding door, speaking quietly into his radio to coordinate the changes. Monique leaned in toward Naomi. You handled that with precision. I've never seen anything like it. Naomi's tone was soft. That's the point. She stepped aside so Martin could stand, his movement slow, reluctant. The cabin watched as he gathered his things. The walk toward the boarding door heavy with the awareness of what had just unfolded. Kara followed, her shoulders tight, Daniel behind her. When the three of them had gone, Naomi finally placed her briefcase in the overhead bin, then turned to face the passengers. Thank you for bearing witness, she said. It matters. The older woman in row 5 smiled warmly. It matters a lot. Naomi eased into her seat at last, the leather cool against her back. The hum of the cabin softer now. Izzy lowered her phone for the first time in nearly an hour. Her expression one of awe. They're already calling this the Ellsworth Ultimatum online. Naomi allowed herself the faintest smile. Let's see what they call it when the protocol is in place. The plane finally began to taxi. The rumble beneath Naomi's feet, a reminder that the battle in the cabin was over. But the war for accountability was just beginning. She could feel the eyes of the passengers still on her, some in quiet admiration, others in stunned disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Izzy leaned across the aisle slightly, her voice hushed but her excitement uncontained. Naomi, the feed is blowing up. News channels have already picked it up. Hashtags with your name are trending. They're calling it one of the boldest mid-flight confrontations ever caught on camera. Naomi rested her head lightly against the seat back. It's not about bold. It's about necessary. Bold gets applause for a day. Necessary changes things for years. Ethan, 2 rows ahead, twisted in his seat. You just wrote my headline for me, he said with a faint smile. Mind if I quote you? Do what you need to do, Naomi replied, but tell the whole story, not just the spectacle. People need to understand the mechanics of how this happens, not just the drama. The flight attendant, now serving first class, was a younger man named Andre, brought in at the last moment to replace Kara. His voice was steady, professional, the kind that smoothed edges rather than created them. He approached Naomi with a quiet deference. Dr. Ellsworth, can I get you anything to drink water? Please, she said. As he walked away, Naomi's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Jonathan Caldwell's name on the screen, but a number from Washington. D.C. She knew who it was before she answered. Naomi, it's Julia from the FAA Civil Rights Office. We've been watching the feed. Do you realize the kind of case you've just handed us on a silver platter? Naomi kept her tone level. I didn't do it for you. But if it helps you accelerate policy changes, I won't object. It will, Julia said. We can push for immediate compliance across all major carriers now. What you did on that plane, no one can dismiss it as rumor or exaggeration. It's documented in real time. Naomi's water arrived, condensation beating down the glass. Then move fast, she said. Momentum is only useful if you act before it fades. As she ended the call, she caught Izzy watching her with open curiosity. That was the FAA, wasn't it? Izzy asked. Naomi didn't confirm, but her faint smile was answer enough. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We'll be making up some time in the air and still expect an on-schedule arrival." Naomi noticed the passengers relax slightly, some putting on headphones, others opening books. But the buzz around her seat didn't fade completely. People were still whispering, still sneaking glances. Ethan slid into the empty seat beside her, notebook in hand. "I'm piecing together the timeline," he said. "From what I gather, Kara ignored gate records, Martin claimed the seat, and Daniel backed him without verification." "Is that accurate? Accurate enough?" Naomi replied. "The finer points will be in the official complaint." Ethan tapped his pen. "You know, I've covered corporate scandals for a decade, and the part that always fascinates me is how quickly power shifts when the right person refuses to yield. You didn't shout. You didn't threaten in the way most people think of threats. You made them see the cost of inaction." Naomi looked out the window at the clouds beginning to drift past. Power only intimidates when it's unfamiliar. "I made them familiar with the consequences." Halfway through the flight, Andre returned, leaning down slightly. "Dr. Ellsworth, the captain asked me to let you know that corporate has officially processed the ban on Mr. Caldwell and the termination of the crew members you identified. They also want to confirm they're beginning work on the discrimination protocol you outlined." Naomi's brows lifted slightly. "That's unusually fast." Andre smiled faintly. "You have the whole world watching. That's a strong motivator." Izzy let out a low whistle. "They really did it. All 3 demands in motion before we've even landed." Naomi sipped her water, her voice calm. "Good. Now they can prove it's more than performance." Ethan leaned back in his seat, jotting notes. "I can already tell this is going to hit front pages. But I'll make sure the headline isn't just about drama. It'll be about reform in real time." Naomi turned toward him. "Then you'll be doing your job right." An hour later, as the flight began its descent, Naomi's phone buzzed again. This time it was an email notification, the subject line reading "Merger Approval Impact, Urgent." She opened it to find messages from 2 separate shareholder groups, both indicating their support for her stance and their intent to condition their vote on the airline's compliance with her protocol. She allowed herself a small exhale. The ripple effect was already spreading. Izzy leaned in one last time before the wheels touched down. "Naomi, when this lands literally and figuratively, your name's going to be everywhere. Are you ready for that?" Naomi looked at her, the faintest curve of a smile at her lips. "This isn't about my name. It's about making sure the next black woman who boards a plane doesn't have to fight this battle at 30,000 feet." The landing gear hit the runway with a soft thud, the reverse thrust roaring briefly before settling. Passengers began gathering their things, but the glances toward Naomi carried a new kind of respect, not just curiosity. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, Andre approached once more. "Dr. Ellsworth, corporate has requested to meet you at the gate. There will be media there, too." Naomi stood, reaching for her briefcase. "Then let's go finish what we started." The cabin door opened with a soft hiss, and the air from the jet bridge felt cooler, carrying the faint scent of coffee from the terminal. Naomi stepped into the aisle, her briefcase in hand, moving with the calm precision of someone who knew exactly what waited for her. Izzy followed close behind, still streaming, her phone angled to catch every frame. Ethan walked a few paces back, his notebook tucked under his arm, eyes sharp for details. At the end of the jet bridge stood a small knot of people. Jonathan Caldwell was front and center, his dark suit impeccable, his expression carefully neutral. Two corporate assistants flanked him, one clutching a tablet, the other a slim leather folder. Behind them, a pair of security officers stood at ease, though their eyes tracked every movement. Jonathan stepped forward, extending his hand. "Dr. Ellsworth," he said smoothly, "I believe we have a great deal to discuss." Naomi stopped just short of taking his hand. Her eyes locked on his. "We do. But I suggest we start with why it took a public broadcast to get your airline to enforce its own policies." His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before the practiced corporate smile returned. This was an isolated incident. The individuals involved have been removed from duty, and we're moving quickly on the protocol you suggested. Our priority is ensuring you're satisfied with the resolution. Naomi's voice was calm, but her words carried weight. This isn't about my satisfaction, it's about your systemic problem, a problem that doesn't vanish just because the cameras turn away. Izzy's audience count ticked past 12,000. Comments flooded the feed. He's trying to spin it already. She's not letting him off the hook. Stay firm. Naomi Jonathan's assistant stepped forward slightly. "Dr. Ellsworth, we've drafted an initial outline for the discrimination reporting protocol. If you'd like to review, I'll review it," Naomi said. "But understand this, I will be monitoring implementation. If there's one deviation from what we agreed, I will go public again. And I won't need to set foot on another plane to make my point." The assistant hesitated, then nodded. Jonathan shifted his weight. "I believe we can find common ground here. You've made your point, and we intend to make this right." Naomi's eyes didn't waver. "Your intention is irrelevant without follow-through. You have 72 hours to prove you're acting in good faith. If you fail, I will personally ensure your merger doesn't just stall, it collapses." One of the security officers, a tall woman with a badge reading Ellis, stepped forward just enough to make her presence felt. "Ma'am, if there's anything further you need in terms of documentation or witness statements, TSA is prepared to cooperate fully." Naomi gave a short nod. "I'll have my office contact you this afternoon." Ethan had been quietly observing, jotting notes between exchanges. Now he stepped closer. "Jonathan, care to comment for the record on whether your airline will extend the protocol to international routes?" Jonathan glanced at him with the faintest flicker of annoyance. "We'll review applicability across all operations once the domestic framework is in place." "That's a no," Naomi said softly, but loud enough for the microphones to catch. "You just made my next headline for me." A ripple of murmurs ran through the small crowd that had gathered at the gate passengers who had followed the story from their seats. Journalists alerted by the live stream, and curious travelers who had overheard just enough to want more. Jonathan's smile thinned. "Dr. Ellsworth, I'd prefer we continue this conversation in a more private setting." "That's convenient for you," Naomi replied, "but privacy has been your shield for too long. Today, transparency is the point." Izzy angled her phone to capture both faces in frame. "My viewers agree," she said. "They've been talking about how moments like this need to happen in public so everyone sees the dynamic for themselves." Jonathan's eyes flicked to the camera, then back to Naomi. "Very well, but I'll remind you, our goal here is resolution. My goal," Naomi said, "is transformation. There's a difference." A silence hung between them, the kind that makes bystanders lean forward. Then Jonathan straightened, signaling to his assistants. "We'll have the first implementation report in your inbox within 24 hours, and you'll have direct access to our compliance officers for the next 6 months. That's a start," Naomi said, "not a finish." Ethan stepped in again. "Dr. Ellsworth, one last question before you go. What message do you want this moment to send to people watching who've experienced something similar but felt powerless to act?" Naomi met his gaze, her voice measured. Powerlessness is what they rely on. Every policy gap, every unverified decision, every quiet bias, they all depend on you thinking you have no recourse. The moment you know your worth and your rights, you shift the balance. And once you shift it, they can't unshift it without the whole world noticing. The crowd was silent for a beat. Then scattered applause began, growing louder. Jonathan didn't join in, but he didn't try to stop it either. Naomi adjusted her grip on her briefcase. "I'll see your report tomorrow." And Jonathan, she paused just long enough for the air to hold. Don't mistake compliance for closure. With that, she turned toward the terminal, Izzy and Ethan falling in step beside her. Cameras followed, flashes popping. Passengers murmured her name. Somewhere in the background, a gate agent was already answering questions from curious travelers who had only caught fragments of the confrontation. As they walked, Izzy lowered her phone slightly. That was something else. You didn't just take your seat back. You took the narrative away from them completely. Naomi gave the smallest shrug. Narratives shape policy more than any memo ever will. Now, let's make sure the story they tell themselves tomorrow is one where they had no choice but to change. Ethan's pen scratched quickly over his page. "You realize you've set a precedent here. Airlines will be talking about this behind closed doors before the end of the day." "Good," Naomi said. "Let them talk. Talking means they're thinking. Thinking means they're worried. And worry makes people act." By the time they reached the baggage claim, Naomi's phone had already begun vibrating with calls and texts, messages from legal colleagues, civil rights groups, and even 2 senators' offices. She didn't answer any of them yet. There would be time for that later. For now, she had one focus: making sure the promises made at that gate didn't vanish into the comfortable fog of corporate memory. She glanced at Izzy. "Keep your footage safe. Back it up twice. If they try to dispute anything, we'll have every frame ready." "Already on it," Izzy said. "And Naomi, my feed just crossed 15,000 live viewers. That's before it even hits replay." Naomi didn't smile, but her eyes held a quiet light. "Then we've already won half the battle." By the time Naomi stepped out of the terminal and into the humid, late afternoon air, the press had gathered in full force. Microphones were extended toward her like drawn swords. Camera flashes lit up her face in sharp bursts, and a wall of questions rose all at once. "Dr. Ellsworth, how do you respond to the airline statement calling this an isolated misunderstanding? Do you believe this was racially motivated? And if so, will you take legal action? What message do you have for Black women traveling alone in first class?" Naomi paused at the curb, the chaos swirling around her, but she didn't let it shake her focus. She scanned the crowd until she spotted Ethan just beyond the first ring of reporters, his notebook ready, watching her carefully. Izzy stood to her right, still filming, still capturing every angle. She raised her voice just enough to cut through the noise. "Let me be clear. What happened on that flight was not an isolated incident. It was the visible result of invisible habits, unchecked bias, inconsistent enforcement of policy, and a corporate culture that rewards deference to power rather than fairness to passengers. That's why this matters. That's why I didn't let it slide. The crowd quieted, the frenzy of questions dimming for the moment. Naomi stepped closer to the microphones. I'm not here to ruin anyone's career for sport, but when an airline allows employees to override documented seating assignments based on personal preference, when it validates that decision because the passenger is connected to leadership, that's not just an inconvenience, it's a breach of trust. And trust is the only thing that keeps you in the air. One reporter shouted above the rest, "The CEO has said they'll adopt your protocol." How will you ensure they follow through? Naomi's expression was steady. They will follow through because the alternative is collapse. I have the leverage, the documentation, and now the public pressure to ensure compliance. And for the record, if they backtrack, I'll be right here again, with the same resolve. The cameras kept rolling. She could see in the faces around her that this wasn't just a one-day headline. It was already a movement in the making. From the corner of her eye, Naomi noticed a tall woman with close-cropped hair stepping out of the crowd. It was Monique Harris, now off duty and dressed in civilian clothes. She handed Naomi a small envelope, documentation from TSA, as promised. Full incident record from the moment the gate scanned your boarding pass to the moment the flight departed. It's airtight. Naomi took it, her fingers brushing the edge. You didn't have to do this off the clock. Monique's voice was low but firm. Sometimes, if you want to see change, you can't wait for the next shift. Ethan was already scribbling the quote in his notebook. Izzy leaned toward Naomi. Your name is everywhere online. There are calls for a boycott of the airline until the protocol's officially in place. Hashtags in multiple languages. You've gone international. Naomi started walking toward the car waiting at the curb. Izzy and Ethan fell in step beside her, reporters trailing like a tide that couldn't quite reach the shore. She opened the back door but paused before getting in. For those watching, for those who've been here before, she said over her shoulder, know this, you don't have to match their volume to match their power. Sometimes the calmest voice in the room is the one they fear the most. The door closed, muting the noise outside. Inside the car, the air was cool, tinted glass offering a moment of privacy. Naomi set the envelope from Monique on her lap, feeling its weight. Ethan leaned forward from the front passenger seat. You just gave them the line that will live on every broadcast tonight. The calmest voice is the one they fear the most. That's going to stick. It's not for them to fear, Naomi said quietly. It's for others to remember. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from a federal contact she trusted. You've got an open lane. Push hard now, and the Department of Transportation will back you. She typed a brief reply. Understood. Drafting demands tonight. As the car pulled away from the terminal, Izzy turned her phone toward Naomi. Do you want to see the numbers? Naomi shook her head. Not yet. If I start chasing numbers, I start losing focus. This isn't about the feed. It's about the follow-through. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the cityscape unfolding outside the tinted windows. Naomi let her mind wander briefly to the passengers on that flight, to the faces she'd seen shift from doubt to respect, to the way Kara had gone pale when the ultimatum landed, and then, inevitably, To the future, the meetings, the monitoring, the long grind of turning a headline into a permanent safeguard. Ethan broke the quiet. Tomorrow, every major outlet will have this as their top story. Are you ready for the requests morning shows, panel discussions, interviews? Naomi kept her eyes on the skyline. I'll choose where I speak and where I don't. This isn't about my 15 minutes. It's about building something they can't undo in 15 years. The car turned into the underground entrance of her hotel. Security personnel moved quickly to block lingering reporters from following. Naomi stepped out, the envelope still in hand. Izzy stopped her briefly. Naomi, you should know. Some people in the comments are saying you gave them hope. People who've been through worse. They're talking about how they'll speak up next time. For the first time since leaving the plane. Naomi's expression softened. Then maybe we've already started winning. She headed toward the elevators, her stride unhurried. She knew tomorrow would be another battle meetings with federal regulators, drafting the language of the protocol, fielding calls from allies and opponents alike. But for tonight, she allowed herself a rare truth: she had shifted the balance, and once shifted, it would not easily be pushed back. The elevator doors closed, and for a moment there was only the quiet hum of the motor as it rose, carrying her toward the next stage of the fight. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Naomi's hotel suite. The city below was already buzzing. Commuters filling the streets, news vans parked outside like an unspoken reminder that the story hadn't faded overnight. Naomi sat at the small dining table, a fresh pot of coffee within reach. Her laptop opened to a spreadsheet that didn't just outline demands, it mapped consequences. Izzy was sprawled on the couch, her phone in constant motion as she fielded messages from journalists, activists, and strangers whose lives had been touched by the live stream. Naomi, she said without looking up, your video has crossed 10 million views. That's not counting clips people have reposted. It's everywhere: morning shows, podcasts, even late-night monologues. Naomi sipped her coffee, eyes still on the screen. That's noise unless it translates to action. What about the airline? Izzy scrolled. They've issued 2 more statements. Both say they're moving forward with your protocol, but the wording's slippery. Lots of evaluating and exploring. Naomi's fingers paused on the keyboard, which means they're already looking for ways to water it down. Ethan arrived a few minutes later, a messenger bag slung over his shoulder. I've been in touch with a source inside the compliance department, he said, settling into the chair across from her. They're drafting something, but the CEO's office is pushing to limit the protocol to domestic flights only. That's not acceptable, Naomi said without hesitation. Bias doesn't stop at the border, and neither should accountability. She began typing quickly, crafting a letter addressed to both the airline's board and the Department of Transportation. Her tone was precise, professional, but it carried an undercurrent that couldn't be mistaken comply fully, or face collapse. At 10:15 a.m., her phone rang. Jonathan Caldwell's name lit up the screen. Naomi answered without breaking her typing rhythm. You have 61 hours left. His voice was tight. Dr. Ellsworth, we're making progress, but international implementation will require negotiations with no whence. Naomi interrupted, still typing. You don't negotiate with bias. You eliminate it. If you don't include all routes, I'll call the shareholder vote early and block your merger. I've already got commitments from 2 major blocks. There was a pause on the line. You'd burn the merger over this? I'd burn the merger to make sure this never happens to another passenger, she said, her voice even. You have the resources. You're stalling because you think I'll blink. I won't. When she hung up, Izzy let out a low whistle. You didn't even raise your voice. That's not how you make them listen, Naomi replied. You make them listen by showing them there's no other path forward. The rest of the day was a blur of calls, federal regulators confirming their backing, advocacy groups offering legal support, and media outlets requesting comment. Naomi took only the calls that moved the needle. Everything else could wait. By the second evening, momentum was building. Monique Harris called to let her know TSA was ready to integrate their own reporting systems with the new protocol, meaning discrimination cases could be tracked across agencies, not just within the airline. It's the kind of cross-system visibility they've been avoiding for years, Monique said. Then we've already won more than I expected this week, Naomi replied. On the morning of the third day, 69 hours after the confrontation on the plane, Naomi received an encrypted email. It was from an anonymous source within the airline. Attached was a document, an unedited draft of the internal strategy notes. She scanned the text, her jaw tightening at one bullet point. Prepare alternative compliance framework to present if Ellsworth refuses compromise. She forwarded it to Ethan and Izzy without comment, then began drafting her public statement at exactly 71 hours and 45 minutes. Jonathan Caldwell called again. His tone was different now, the easy confidence gone. Dr. Ellsworth, the board has voted to adopt your protocol in full. Domestic and international, no amendments. The press release will go out within the hour. Naomi didn't smile, but her shoulders eased slightly. Good. And you'll submit quarterly reports to the FAA. Correct. Yes, he said quickly, and we'll invite you to review implementation personally. Then you've made the right decision, she said, and ended the call. She turned to Izzy. It's done. Izzy grinned. No, it's just starting. Now they have to live up to it. Naomi opened her laptop again, this time to a fresh document. She began writing the first in a series of op-eds, not about herself, but about the passengers who'd written to her in the last 3 days. Stories of being moved, ignored, humiliated, and sometimes vindicated. The more of these we put out there, she said, the harder it will be for them to slip back into old habits. Ethan closed his notebook, his smile faint but certain. You've changed the conversation, and in this business, that's everything. As evening settled over the city, Naomi stepped out onto the balcony, the hum of traffic below mixing with the distant sound of a news broadcast. She thought of the moment in the aisle when Kara had stood her ground against her, not out of principle, but out of habit. She thought of Martin Caldwell's smug certainty that his connections would protect him. She thought of every passenger who had looked away, then looked back when the balance shifted. This wasn't about her name, or even the airlines. It was about the next person who would board a plane without fear of being told they didn't belong. It was about a seat that could no longer be taken because someone thought power was theirs by birthright. She went back inside, the glow from her laptop spilling across the table. The work ahead was long, but she had already proven something to herself and to anyone watching. The calmest voice in the room could change the course of an entire industry if it refused to be ignored, and this voice wasn't going anywhere. In 72 hours, a single voice changed the course of an airline's future. Dr. Naomi Ellsworth didn't raise her volume. She raised the standard. and in doing so, she proved that calm resolve can be louder than any outburst, and that justice can be won without losing your dignity. But this story is bigger than one woman or one airline. It's about every passenger who's ever been told they didn't belong, every quiet injustice that went unchallenged, and the truth that silence only benefits those who cause the harm. We must remember discrimination, no matter how small it looks in the moment, leaves a lasting mark. And when we stand against it, we stand for more than ourselves. We stand for everyone who will come after us. If this story moved you, let it inspire you to speak up, to protect what's right, and to hold power accountable. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel so you'll be here when we tell the next story that challenges the world to do better. Because these conversations can't end here, they're just getting started.